Kid by the side of the road by SAVIN. We've all been bystanders, watching events go by, not understanding their true meaning. Continued at the bottom of page 62. What happens when people learn the truth? What happens when people wake up? They will not be able to walk down the street. If you punch JFK in the qmap.pub or Q Alerts app, it shows up 33 times, with one of those being JFK prayer. At the time this document was being drafted, prayer showed up 13 times. More times since. It's the power of our prayer to break the cult's attempts to use occult numbers like 33 and 13 for building more control over us. When the globalists use numbers like that, it is their prayers to Satan against us. We are destroying the monster. And these next few weeks and months are going to be amazing. We need to gird up to face this full on and be ready to talk with our neighbors and friends, explaining what we've learned over these last couple of years so that we can be part of this important moment as we regain control of the ship. In doing so, we will steer our ship of state in a godly direction. And away from this hellish course they have had us careening down for many, many years. So, this satanic cult relies on numbers for their occult witchcraft and wizardry. Practices acquired from demons that were established for humans during the time of the Tower of Babel. God judged those evil practices and confused the language so people would disperse across the earth, something he had told them to do about 200 years earlier after Noah and his family came off that ark. God's judgment came to the people of Babylon, after which the Babylonian sewer pipe of occult practices spread across this fallen world, giving us the witchcraft and wizardry we're dealing with worldwide today. About those people around that Tower of Babel, God said this: if as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Again, today, we are at a Tower of Babel moment in the history of man. That obstacle of different languages, which had been a choke point for these practitioners of evil, is gone. We are back to the time where we've overcome God's divine scattering of Earth's people by language. Without being able to explain in detail here, this will give you an idea of what I mean. We are now in this age where we have a new universal language of numbers. I'm talking about the computer's ones and zeros in a binary base 6 numerical computer language where 6 data points makes up each byte or letter of the language 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 0000001, 0000011, etc. It's a language of ones and zeros that is based in groupings of 6 digits, where A equals 6, B equals 12, C equals 18, and so on. It's a 666 based system that has now bypassed God's blockage of worldwide communications. We are back to the point where all Earth's people can easily communicate with each other. So, whatever our modern man conceives, he can now achieve again. Where are we at now? That involves looking at the larger aspects of this Q project. The goal is to get 17 back for ourselves, which means rooting out this deep state. But how are we going to do that? Well, coming up on another anniversary of our president's murder by a cabal, we're going after these people that led the coup and locked in place the lie that it was a lone gunman. Anyone still believing that is just not being honest and doesn't want to be part of this adult conversation. Likewise, the false narrative we've been sold by the corrupt media that 9/11 was done by some Afghan terrorists working from mountain caves has to be given up by the last media duped holdouts. President T has said that. Before he's done in office, we will know who brought those buildings down. And I don't think he's going to disappoint us. As a nation, we are reorienting ourselves, taking to our feet for the defeat of these enormous monsters in our midst, cutting them back down to size, incarcerating them, and cleansing our country from all the evil they've done in our name. Then we can again be light to the world, bringing our planet's people back into right relationship with Earth's creator. Some decades after we'd been born as a nation, Alex de Tocqueville, to Tocqueville, to Tocqueville, a French aristocrat, came over to our country for an understanding of Americans in 1831. He began traveling our countryside to meet and talk with average folks from all facets of society, including business owners, politicians, school teachers and officials, clergy, moms, dads, farmers, and anyone else who would have had a conversation with him. He stayed with people in their homes as he traveled, after coming all the way from France and then spending a long period intimately examining early America. What was to Tocqueville's conclusion? He said that what made America great was an innate goodness at its grassroots level. In a later book about his travels among us, on democracy in America, he said this: America is great because she is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. That is the discussion. which must occur at this moment. Are we as individuals and as a people seeking to be good? Are we actually investing our life energies for intelligent, honorable, and fruitful purposes? Are we doing good things? Or are our lives and resources being sucked away from us and diverted to be used for evil? By that, I mean really horrible, unspeakable evils. We absolutely must revolt against our forced contributions that support the twisted ambitions of these globalistas. If we seek the road to greatness, to Tocqueville study of early America tells us we must get back to being good. And that's what this is all about. If we are good again in a basic and generic sense, we'll ultimately be great again, and thus fulfill our God given mission as salt and light for people all across this planet. That's my wish for us, that we would cleanse away this evil and be good. On that way, along our divinely appointed path, we shall save America. Chapter 4. Silvery Thread and Purim Dreams. It was like a silvery thread in my mind, and I should tell you that this image of our country today, which was emblazoned in my memory during just a few short moments, didn't come to me easily. But I want to give you the background on a late night event that gripped me and hasn't let go. It was before CO Video 19, when I was traveling east and south off the coast of Iran toward my next step near India, having just left by boat from a long day of meetings. Though those talks were enjoyable, I'd had an exhausting day, so I'd gone to sleep in the vessel that was taking me to India. I was soundly out. Normally, I am not prone to memorable dreams. For my entire life, I can count on one hand those that have had an impact on me. But this one was so vividly jarring. Immediately felt like I needed to phone a friend, even though it was the middle of the night. I wanted to be able to play it back and try to understand, because what I'm going to tell you was so stunning and shocking to me. In my sleep, I suddenly saw myself standing in the middle of an older church that was tall, long, and narrow. I remember thinking at the time that it was a Protestant style church with wooden pews to either side of me. As I stood in the aisle about three-quarters of the way back, in the sanctuary area at the front of the church, I saw what seemed to be a pastor at a podium, but he wasn't dressed in the usual robe. Instead, he wore more of a suit as he stood centered at the top of some steps with an altar behind him. As I glanced around to gather the situation, I noticed painted glass windows in the front and off to the left. Coming through them was what appeared to be afternoon light with just a shade of shadow. After a moment, I noticed people scattered somewhat evenly throughout the church. None were sitting together. In my recollection, it seems like something more than a dozen parishioners, but nothing like the few hundred that church probably had. As I looked around, the sound that caught my attention came from behind me. I realized I'd just heard the last note from a song. So I looked over my left shoulder to see a chair loft behind and above me. In it, the chair was made up of both black and white singers who were all wearing black robes with silver and blue collars. I noticed what looked like bright red blood on the sleeves of a few, and the hint of shaved, ghoulish teeth on those singers. There was at least one person who looked like they had blood on the side of their face, like he had a cut on his lip. The group obviously didn't seem like a normal church choir. There was a certain tension that gave me an uncomfortable feeling. So I started to turn away, but something also in the loft caused me to look over my other shoulder toward the right side of that loft. Beside the choir that was mostly to the left side, but taking up two-thirds of the loft. A portion of the right side appeared to have an organ. I could see exceptionally long, slightly sagging ropes hanging down from the middle of that tall ceiling at the center of the church. The ropes were like those you'd see with a trapeze swing at a circus, where there is a wooden board that the person swinging would sit or stand on. There was a hand holding one rope of the swing, and it was on the arm of a man in a suit with his back to me. Another man in front of him and with his face to me wore the same darker blue suit as the other man. In fact, the slacks and entire cut of the two suits looked like they had come from the same tailor. I could see that the man facing me had a white shirt and a light blue tie that stood out to me. I recognized him as the very public figure he is, but his face looked sort of blank, like he was following instructions, seemingly as if he almost needed direction just to move. There was about 3 feet of wall in front of the choir that kept anyone from a high fall to those heavy wooden pews below. Somehow, that second man who I had recognized climbed up on top of the wall. He must have used some sort of steps on the other side. The other man with his back to me was standing with his goat like feet on a little berm at the front of the wall and holding swing in place for the man I recognized. The latter man grabbed those ropes and stepped onto the swing that was perched high up in the church. Just shocked at the precarious situation, I thought. That's so dangerous. What is he going to do? I'd been pleasantly relaxed when I went to bed, but this dream was vivid and intense. There had been a beautiful full moon out across the water that night, but now my mood changed with the all consuming intensity of this focused dream. As I watched the balcony, I was afraid this person was going to do something that would really get him hurt. It seemed like such grandstanding, and I didn't see the point. As the man grabbed onto the ropes and stepped onto the swing, he seemed to be holding them tightly. I could tell he was fearful, but also almost robotic in his facial expression, with nearly black eyes looking straight forward and a fixed stare as though numbed or possibly drugged. The man holding the swing for the other seemed to need to jostle it to get his attention, sort of spurring him on. The two men locked eyes for only a moment, and even though the swing holder had his back to me. There appeared to be some sort of agreement as the man on the swing gripped the ropes tighter. Right then, the suited man let go of the swing, and the other man who was standing on it started swinging down toward my right shoulder. He quickly got to my level where I thought he was going to hit the pews. Luckily, he stayed within the wide center aisle as he passed, skimming the floor before the swing started its arc back up toward the left side of the stage altar platform area. And as the man on his swing got there, I could hear a gasp going through the now standing people, who appeared to perceive that this surprise grandstanding event was cause for excitement, like they were watching a circus performer dropping in. I had a feeling that the agreed intent was for him to step off the swing and onto the sanctuary area at the top of the steps. It was like the man standing at the podium was ready to shake his hand as soon as he miraculously arrived. But the swing had too much momentum. I remember thinking of the basic physics. Would that start high up at the back of the church like a pendulum swinging in a clock? He was going to arc much higher on the upswing than they had apparently anticipated. The top of the follow-through would nearly match the height he took off from in the back, which of course it did. He hadn't gotten off at the altar area, most likely because it would have been a frightening leap. He would have had to throw himself from the swing and then try stopping quickly before his momentum slammed him into the top left side of the altar area near the large and painted lead glass window. So he passed the other suited guy at the podium. From that window seemed to intensify, and on his way up, the light from that window seemed to intensify to a more orange and darker color. Nearing the top of his upswing, the man had arced pretty hard to the point where his back was nearly flat to the stage, like sanctuary floor. He appeared somewhat suspended for a moment and looked over his right shoulder, back towards the podium, now far below and to his right. I could see his face suddenly became fearful. But again, it was kind of a blank fearfulness, as opposed to the fear from someone that truly understood his situation. I don't know quite how to describe it exactly because the look was one of knowing, but also questioning and not seeming to process events at the same speed things were happening. By now, his hands were gripping the ropes of that swing so hard that they were almost white, and he had held a certain locked in stance as he hovered there for just an instant at the top of that arc. The moment sort of froze in my mind because I realized this was not going to end well. It was going to turn into something horrible. I had a strong sense of foreboding, like a deer in the headlights. I wanted to move because I thought the swing was probably going to come back at me, but I hesitated because I wasn't sure which way to jump yet. When it did start back, the fact that he had been looking over his shoulder twisted the swing just enough that it wasn't quite following the same path back. It had an altered motion, like it was now cutting a barely noticeable figure eight in the air. But I could tell it wasn't the exact reverse trajectory. As it came back and swept past the podium, it shot down the middle aisle and got very near to the ground again. At that point, I remember thinking the best he could hope for is to jump off where he's at, though he would probably still get hurt badly and maybe even slam the swing's board into someone. But in his seemingly slow to comprehend mental state, he didn't take that opportunity. The swing kept coming back and started up with him still looking back over his shoulder, trying to see where he was while also bending his knees a bit, probably bracing for impact. As he passed along the aisle toward me and started arcing back up between the pews, he missed them all except the last one in that midsection, which he struck hard in a startling crash. For some reason, in that adrenaline spiked instant, I momentarily locked eyes with a woman standing near where he hit. I recognized her too as a public figure with her dark hair and brown skin. The idea that she was an Indian flashed through my mind, like she might be from near the place I was headed, Sri Lanka, which is off the southern coast of India. She was standing very near the corner of the pew that had just caught the man's swing. When his board hit about a half dozen pews in front of me and to the right of the aisle, the man couldn't hold on, and there was nothing I could do but watch. He catapulted off the swing and into the air, flipping completely upside down as he flew toward me and abruptly stopped when the side of his head, just above his left eye, slammed hard into the top corner of the pew. It was an awful sound that really bothered me, and a gasp went out all through the crowd, including from the chair loft above. Having hit the pew with his head down and faced toward me at the time, it was a vivid and shocking image. On impact, he crumbled and flipped again as the collision ricocheted him into the middle of the aisle, landing at my feet. He was looking sideways and up at me, but his eyes showed what was probably his last instance of consciousness. Above the eye, his skull was cracked horribly open, and part of it was laying in the aisle on the ground behind him. The gruesomeness shocked me severely. I remember seeing the Indian woman suddenly leap forward like she wanted to grab that piece of the skull to maybe somehow try fixing him or something. I don't know. But an instant later, the swing's heavy board that had chaotically flown upwards after the man was thrown off arrived back down and clipped the side of her face, right at the edge of her mouth. She screamed, and a rush of adrenalized fear went through me and the entire church. I could see her teeth were a bit bloodied on that side. It was gripping. Now, feeling like the light in the room had darkened, I looked away from her, glancing forward and up to the windows at the front of the church. The color outside had changed again, darkening significantly like it was growing smoky, which it probably was because boiling red and bright orange flickers pierced the haze. I had no doubt a great fire was eating up the outside of that church as the painted glass turned black. In that instant, one more time, I looked down at the pool of blood around the man's broken head, and the horror of that scene was so disturbing it caused me to wake there in bed and suddenly sit straight up. My jolt was like someone who's had a horrible start during a tense slasher movie. At that point, I could not stay in that very comfortable place I had been sleeping. There at the end of that unforgettable dream, not only did I need to get up because of the frantic feeling, but it was also because the sweat soaked bed felt like someone had thrown a bucket of water on me. I climbed out of the bed and stood beside it, trying to grasp what had just happened. I walked over to the window and saw what I hadn't expected: the same calm night from earlier, including that full moon still out across water. While standing there drenched in sweat, I spent the next few moments staring out and contemplating my experience. Because it had been so vivid and intense, it took me those moments to solidify in my mind that this had actually been a dream. I had to walk around for a minute to bring the adrenaline level down, after which I was calm enough to go over to the sink and get some cold water from an ice bucket. In fact, the bucket had some wine in it, so I first chilled my forehead with the bottle and then cracked the top open to have some. I don't normally drink much alcohol. I'm mostly a teetotaler, but I was dehydrated, wanted some cold liquid, and needed something to calm my nerves. Of course, when I regained some composure, each moment of the dream started pouring back into my mind, almost frame by frame. It had been so real that my playback of it clearly recalled exactly what happened, and I even felt the emotions again. As I mentioned, even though it was the middle of the night for me, at that point I texted and contacted a friend back in the States where it was afternoon. Over the phone, I was able to rehash and analyze the dream. While sitting on the rear deck of the boat, and as the result of much contemplation, I came to the realization that it fit this moment in history, which we are coming into right now. You may have a different interpretation or understanding, as did many I've shared it with. But to me, that church was a captured operation. God wasn't there. It had all the trappings of a religious location, but had been taken over by others. Godliness. Is not what they were about. They weren't worshiping God our Father in heaven, and the man in the choir loft with his back to me, the one who was sort of hiding his face from me, was the angel of death and destruction. He was pushing the other man into his grandstanding event. At some point, I remember that his hand, protruding from that suit sleeve, had an almost claw like look. That image with his feet appearing hooved made me realize that thing was the Baphomet, the evil goat man deity in occult worship. The whole experience was extremely dramatic. I was unable to sleep and went to get coffee, then headed back, then headed to the back of the vessel to collect my thoughts. I sat watching the moon set, and a little later the sunrise, with this whole silver thread of thought appearing to me as if refracted through water and dancing like a river of time. In my mind, something else struck me. This grandstanding event inside that building with fire erupting all around was going to end with that place burned to the ground. Yet those suited men inside were only concerned about the show value of the event they were pulling off. One thing I didn't mention was all the television type cameras and operators stationed around the sanctuary or stage. In fact, they potentially numbered as many or more than the scattered audience. And it was strange to me that as all this chaos and tragedy happened, they just kept filming away. At no point did anyone try stopping that reckless stunt or attempting to help the man on the swing. They were just being sure to film it all. Maybe the camera people didn't care, and I don't think the audience realized that what they were watching was going to become a tragedy. I also came to the conclusion that what was inside that church could not be fixed. The entire building and everyone in it would soon be burnt to the ground, and no one was going to stop it. God wasn't there anyway. Instead, it was someone else or some other entity controlling that place. And now our opportunity was only to salvage the broader community around it, keeping more structures from being destroyed by the spreading fires. We would not be able to rebuild on that exact spot. Something wrong and twisted occupied that space. Something evil. It would forever be an unredeemable, burnt down ruin, left as some kind of a monument to what had transpired. Just as our statues and monuments today are not always to praise someone or point back at only positive events in our history. Sometimes they are meant to stand as a spectacle that warns against repeated mistakes. The people who originally constructed and occupied that building were probably sincere and honest, God fearing folks. But now that specific site was not the right place anymore, the way forward would not be to rebuild some past system or structures that aren't right for our time today. What needs to happen with our community is the reinforcement of what is already good, and then adding fresh, clear, and clean growth that allows for a new beginning to again turn the neighborhood toward a godly course. We must build in a new place, maybe over the hill from that burnt out monument, so that we don't dwell on the evil of it moment to moment. We won't see it day to day, but it will always be there for a reminder and warning. Over the hours and days that followed, I had a personal revelation of sorts. I saw this entire event like an equation in my mind. I realized it was the coming election and the drama surrounding it. I perceived it was a challenge presented by the people I commonly describe as the corn, people who are made up, concocted, created, and then placed in these mutually beneficial deep state positions. We see these people as our business leaders, politicians, entertainers, musicians, scientists, professors, and religious figures who are foisted upon us. They see themselves as our superiors and societal masters. As this equation was coming together in my mind, I saw parts and pieces scattered amongst a sea of people who picked these raw materials up. Working together, they began to build. The items each person brought became tools in their hands. For some, but for others, became parts for structures or machinery. And in some cases, even art. They came forward and gathered above those corn rows atop that great platform. And emblazoned across the front of that platform, I could see the word MAGA glowing brightly like neon. The people on the platform were those who would make America great again, the workers, inventors, builders, parents, raising children, and teachers. All these with scriptures in hand, which were for each of them a word or directive from God. I could see the countenance and determination on their faces, that they were strong, willing, and ready for the harvest. To the left of the platform looms this election, and the outcome of the election will be equal to the energy expressed by the MAGA over the corn. But the amount of corn and its vastness by rows is so deep and wide that the strength of the MAGA can't only be squared like their two-dimensional flatland of surreality and propaganda. It must be real to match the world we actually live in. It must be cubed, adding height and making it three-dimensional, as contrasting as our real world is against their two-dimensional cinematic illusions. Therefore, election 2020 will equal MAGA to the third power over corn. Looking out beyond the 2020 election cycle, 2022 will be even more critical. The angst among those dispossessed of power will likely cause them to lash out violently. The strength of the MAGA must continuously mature and increase. Therefore, for that time, the equation must also change to election equals MAGA to the fourth power over corn. It's worth noting that the Bible's number of foundation is four. While we certainly will be working with people and their governments around the world during President Trump's second term, please, God, these next 4 years are primarily about cleansing and regaining control of our own house. Most of our time will be spent setting our various affairs in order. In many cases, I'm sure it will require industrial strength products. Beyond that is 2024, where we'll have two great concerns. Here at home, will there be leaders to choose amongst that are capable of grasping and carrying the baton forward when this president steps aside? And just as important, how will we, the people, take our victories at home and share them with our brethren around the globe? In the end, that too is vital because the equation is far more extensive at 2024 and must be expanded to encompass the people of the world, not just America. The equation at that time should be updated to mega as we work together to make Earth great again, which, God willing, will be an era where the children of Adam come together, retaking and enjoying our God given inheritance and blessings. The magnitude of the endeavors we will be engaged in at that time will be such that the mega must be multiplied beyond the third or even the fourth power. To get victory over every dark angel, it must be to the fifth power, since God's grace, when dealing with his children throughout the biblical narrative, is often associated with the number five. In this instance, there is an extra special divinely appropriate aspect to the use of five here. Therefore, Earth's election energy at the 2024 time period must equal mega to the fifth power over global corn. Popcorn. Popcorn. This concludes the reading of Kid by the Side of the Road by SAVIN. We've all been bystanders watching events go by, not understanding their true meaning.